Yeah, that'll be much better. Okay, we'll get far fewer calls and emails now. So this is great. So good morning. Before we launch in, there's news to share. First of all, I'm very, very glad Russ Tripp is back with us, upright and in one piece. Welcome back. And our new friend Kaylee and her granddaughter Ella, did you say, are visiting with us, hiding in the back row, but be sure to say hi to them on your way out as well. And just welcome to everybody. We've got a lot of people, I think, who are off traveling this weekend, including in our choir, which is more of a chamber choir today, but doing a wonderful job nonetheless. I do have some news to share about Wesley, Pastor Alyssa's cute little dog. She 2 weeks ago was up here, asked for prayers for Wesley, who was going through some spinal paralysis issues. And unfortunately, Wesley did not make it. And this past Wednesday, he crossed over and is now up in dog heaven. I saw a movie once that says all dogs go to heaven. So we're counting on that being true, that movies can be for real. And we're going to remember Alyssa in our prayers later, right, Carol?
Yes.
Okay, good. And so Alyssa's doing okay, but what she doesn't want at the moment is tons of phone calls and text messages. So tread lightly for a few days while she sorts this out, and then I'm sure she'll be happy to talk all about it. So those are the news headlines. Now, let's get into the real reason you came here today, to hear about this topic. And I also want to issue a very special welcome to our friends in Lebanon at Lebanon First United Methodist Church, who are joining us online today as well. It is wonderful for me to be up here once again with you as we continue our journey through the Uncommon Wisdom series. So far in this series, we've covered some powerful ground, starting with Pastor Alyssa's exploration of divine love and the choices we make in response to it. Last week, we talked about choosing how we shall live, and today we're diving into the theme of holding on to wisdom. Because let's face it, choosing how we live is one thing, but holding on to wisdom in a world full of distractions, temptations, and outright foolishness, that's a whole different challenge. But it's a challenge we're ready to take on. So get comfortable, because today we're going to explore what it means to cling to wisdom like our lives depended on it, because in many ways they do. We begin with Proverbs chapter 1, the very first proverb of them all, so you know it must be important. In this proverb, as Kirk read, wisdom is personified as a voice crying out in the streets, desperately trying to get our attention. It says, "How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple?" Wisdom isn't just whispering, she's shouting, begging us to listen before it's too late. But how often do we ignore that call? How often do we choose the easy path, hoping we can avoid the consequences? Proverbs reminds us that ignoring wisdom comes at a cost, one we often can't afford. Now, let's connect this to what we've already discussed in the series. Pastor Alyssa spoke about love that reflects the divine love that calls us to something higher. Last week, we discussed how we choose to live, emphasizing the importance of making choices aligned with God's wisdom. Today, we ask, how do we keep choosing wisdom day after day? One answer to that question might be given by one of the greatest figures in American history, President Abraham Lincoln. During the Civil War, Lincoln faced not only a divided nation, but also a barrage of criticism from all sides. Many people urged him to abandon his principles for the sake of expediency, to make compromises that would have brought a quicker end to the war. But Lincoln held on to wisdom, rooted in the belief that slavery was a moral wrong that had to be abolished. He knew that true peace and unity could only be achieved through justice and righteousness. It would have been easier to give in to the pressures around him, but Lincoln chose the harder path, one guided by wisdom and a deep sense of moral duty. He could have chosen the path of least resistance, but he understood that wisdom sometimes demands sacrifice and courage. His decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation was not just a political maneuver. It was an act of moral clarity, guided by the wisdom that true freedom and equality were worth fighting for, even at great personal and national cost. Just as Lincoln held fast to wisdom in the face of enormous pressure, we too are called to hold on to wisdom when the world around us is chaotic and uncertain. It's not enough to choose wisdom once. We have to keep choosing it every day in every decision, just as Lincoln did. Next, for a moment, let's turn to Psalm 19, a beautiful celebration of God's wisdom as revealed in his creation and his law. It says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." This is wisdom written in the very fabric of the universe, in the sunrise and the stars, and in the laws that guide our lives. But let's be honest, sometimes we get so caught up in our daily grind that we forget to stop and look around. We miss the quiet, steady voice of God speaking to us through his creation. Have you ever noticed even how we ignore wisdom when it's staring us right in the face? That reminds me of Black Friday in 2005. You remember Black Friday 05? No? Well, let me tell you about mine. I don't often venture out of the house on Black Fridays, but that year, one of Best Buy's doorbuster deals was a Garmin GPS device that came with a little suction cup mount so you could stick it on your dashboard or your windshield, plug it into the cigarette lighter, and get driving directions right there in the car. I'd wanted one of those for quite a while by that point, but they were very expensive then. If I remember correctly, this particular one was discounted to $99. And so I got in the car and drove down to Springfield and bought one of the last ones Best Buy had. I got back in the car. I was so excited I opened the box right there and plugged it in and attached it to the windshield where I could see it. I typed in my home address on the screen and away I went. Heading up the freeway, I could see that the Garmin was intending for me to get off at the Albany exit, 234B, but I wanted to go a different way. I preferred to get off at Highway 34 and then come up Pacific Boulevard from Tangent. When I took that exit, the Garmin figured out that I was not heeding its wise advice. I remember it saying, "Recalculating," as though I had really hurt its feelings. Other times, I used the Garmin to navigate my way to places I'd never been before, and it was often tempting to go a different way than what Garmin was telling me when I thought I knew better. Sometimes that went well, and other times I found myself wishing I had stayed the course with Garmin. Either way, when I've gone off course, Garmin was always there to patiently recalculate new directions to get me back on track and to my final destination. And the beauty of God's wisdom, as Psalm 19 reminds us, is that it also is always there, patiently waiting for us to notice it. It's more precious than gold, sweeter than honey, and it brings joy to the heart. So let's make it a point to stop, look, and listen. Let's be intentional about seeking out God's wisdom in the world around us and in the Word He has given us. Let's explore a little bit now of James chapter 3. If there's ever a passage that should make us sit up and pay attention, it's in this chapter. James gets a little bit dramatic and warns us about the power of the tongue, saying, "The tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and itself is set on fire by hell. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison." Ew. Well, if that doesn't make you think twice about what you say, what comes out of your mouth, I don't know what will. And James goes on in this chapter with a little less drama, and a lot more hope. He finishes up saying, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness." James reminds us that our words have power to build up or tear down, to bless or to curse. You know as well as I do that in today's world, where everyone has a social media platform and opinions are flying back and forth fast and furious, it's more important than ever to hold on to wisdom when we speak. This ties directly back to the challenge we discussed last week, choosing how we shall live. One of the most important choices we make every day is how we use our words. Will we use them to spread love and truth, or will we let them be weapons that harm others? James isn't just giving us a suggestion here. He's laying down the law. If we want to live wisely, we have to learn to control our tongues. We have to speak with intention, with care, and with a kind of wisdom that reflects God's love. And sometimes that means keeping our mouths shut. There's wisdom in silence, too, in knowing when to hold back instead of speaking out. Remember, it's not about having the last word or the correct word. It's about having the wise word. Here's another story. At the beginning of September, our oldest kid, Caden, with all 22 years of his wisdom, and he's not watching this so I can talk about him, he had been working for a few years, saving up his money and wanted to buy a car. And so has his little sister Piper, who is 16, and also been working and saving up money for a car. So the day after Labor Day was going to be the day when Piper wanted to go car shopping. So off we went to all the little used car dealerships down 12th Street in Salem, figuring we'd start there. And she found something she just adored, and she bought it. It was a pretty good deal. It's a good car, perfect first car. A Kia Sportage. This is not an ad for Kia, but it's great. It suits her to a T. Well, her older brother, who happened to be on his way home from school in Eugene that day to spend a couple days with us, heard that his baby sister was beating him to car ownership, and we knew that was not going to fly. And so sure enough, he wanted to go back and look around with me that day. So, all right, fine. We went back to the same dealership. Very nice guy that owns it. That's great. And I didn't tell Caden this, but I knew the car that was going to catch his eye, that he absolutely should not buy. And sure enough, he became deeply attracted to the 2007 Audi A6. And that's the one he wanted to drive. And I said, okay, all right. So we took it for a drive around Salem, and his smile just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I thought of all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. And I did say at one point that I don't think this is the wisest choice, because this car is old enough and there's a whole lot of things to go wrong in this car, and these parts are not inexpensive. But Caden said, I really like this car. It checks all my boxes. Okay, all right. So we got to a price that Caden could live with. He paid for it. He drained his savings account. He left a little bit in there, but he paid for it all himself. He was very proud and took off to Eugene to show his friends at school and at work. And great. Well, within about a week, it was clear that all was not well with the 2007 Audi A6. And a trip to the mechanic in Salem for an inspection revealed some serious problems. And I just bit my tongue. I did not say I told you so. I was just so thankful that he didn't have a loan on this thing or something that was really going to be a problem to resolve. We spoke to the nice man at the dealership, and he's allowing Caden to trade it. He's going to buy it back from Caden for what he paid as trade-in credit toward something else on his lot, which I think is going to work out very well this week. That was an expensive lesson to learn, that not everything that glitters is gold. And I could have put my foot down and said, no, you're not buying this car. But then I would have been the bad guy. And it was a good lesson for him to learn that you really do have to make responsible, wise choices, not always the fun choices. There will always be Audi A6s out there for him, maybe after medical school. All right. So sometimes saying nothing is the wisest choice. Finally today, let's come to Mark chapter 8, where Jesus asks his disciples the question that lies at the heart of our faith. Who do you say that I am? It's a question that demands a response, a question that cuts through all the noise and forces us to confront the truth of who Jesus is and what it means to follow him. Peter gets it right when he declares that Jesus is the Messiah, but then Jesus drops a bombshell. Following him isn't going to be easy. It's not about glory and power. It's about sacrifice, about taking up our cross and holding on to God's wisdom, even when the world tells us we're fools for doing so. This is where holding on to wisdom gets real. It's not just about making good choices in the everyday stuff. It's about staying true to God's wisdom when the stakes are high. When following Jesus means standing up for what's right, even when it's unpopular. When it means choosing the harder path because it's the one that honors God. And here's the kicker. Jesus tells us that if we try to save our lives by clinging to the world's wisdom, we'll lose them. But if we lose our lives for his sake, if we hold on to God's wisdom, even when it costs us everything, we'll find true life. Let's take just one moment to reflect on another towering figure in American history, Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King was a man who knew the cost of holding on to wisdom in the face of overwhelming opposition. In the fight for civil rights, he was often criticized, threatened, and even jailed. Yet, like Lincoln before him, Dr. King chose the path of wisdom, a path that was rooted in nonviolence, justice, and love. In his famous letter from Birmingham jail, Dr. King articulated the wisdom of waiting for the right time and the right method to bring about change. He knew that wisdom wasn't just about knowing what was right. It was about knowing how to pursue what was right in a way that reflected God's love and justice. He held on to this wisdom, even when it would have been easier to respond with violence or to give up the struggle altogether. Dr. King's legacy teaches us that holding on to wisdom isn't just about personal success or comfort. It's about being willing to sacrifice for a greater good, to stand firm in the face of adversity, and to trust that God's wisdom will guide us through even the darkest times. Just as Dr. King held on to wisdom in the struggle for civil rights, we are called to hold on to God's wisdom in our own lives, even when the path is difficult and the stakes are high. So as we wrap up today, I want to challenge each of us to think about how we're holding on to wisdom in our own lives. Are we listening to wisdom's call even when it's inconvenient? Are we seeking out God's wisdom in the beauty of his creation and the truth of his word? Are we speaking with wisdom, using our words to build up rather than tear down? And are we willing to hold on to God's wisdom, even when it costs us, even when the world calls us fools? Holding on to wisdom isn't just a one-time decision. It's a daily practice, a way of life. It's about choosing to live in a way that reflects the heart of God, even when it's hard, even when it's countercultural, even when it means taking up our cross and following Jesus. This worship series, called Uncommon Wisdom, finishes up over the next 2 Sundays. Next week, Pastor Alyssa will guide us through one of the core beliefs of the United Methodist Church in celebrating women who lead in all aspects of worship, as taught in Proverbs 31. And the final Sunday, she'll take us through wisdom shared by one of those leaders from the Old Testament in the book of Esther, an orphan raised by her uncle Mordecai. He very famously told Esther, "Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just a time as this." Come back that Sunday to find out what was so unique about that time, and maybe what time it is in our lives also. But for today, let's be a people who hold on to wisdom with everything we've got. I know how important this is to Pastor Alyssa, and I know to many of you as well. Let's seek it out, cling to it, and let it guide us in every aspect of our lives. And may our lives be a reflection of the uncommon wisdom that comes from walking in the ways of the Lord. Amen. Now it's time to sing about wisdom. 399, I believe, in the United Methodist Hymnal. 454. Okay, let's do that one instead. 454. While we are teeing up this hymn, there's one other announcement I promised I would mention. We are looking in this congregation for a new treasurer. Our treasurer has put in her 30 years and has decided that's probably enough. And so we said, yeah, probably so. And so this is it's a very easy volunteer position. If you've ever balanced a checkbook, then you know how to read our financial statements. You don't have to balance any checkbooks here. It's more about just being checks and balance for our office and financial goings on so that someone else always knows what's happening. There's a monthly report the treasurer gets. It says, here's everything that came in and here's everything that went out. And as long as there's no red numbers anywhere, then everything is good. So if that is of interest to you, consider it. It's most of it you can do via email. There's very little in-person time and meetings that it takes. It's very, very easy to do it on your terms. If that is of interest to you, please talk to either Carla Long, who's the head of our church single board. Wave, Carla. Thank you. That's Carla. You could also talk to Pastor Alyssa. You're welcome to talk to Rachel about it to get more details on what the job entails. And you don't have to do it for 30 years. You could only do it for 29 if you prefer. That would be fine. But thank you. All right, please stand if you'd like. Let's sing number 454, Open My Eyes That I May See.